And I am listening to you two, and I'm thinking, what the bloody hell are you doing?
Well,
sort it out for me and my future, and get on with it.
I completely
Because at
agree.
the moment, you are a leisure centre sport.
Well, we're joined now by Sanjay Bhandari, who is the chair of Super League Basketball, and Chris Grant, who has just stepped down, as we heard from John Amaechi, as the chair of the BBF, the British Basketball Federation. And we've heard John's take on the situation as to kind of how it got into the situation where FIBA have banned British basketball from competing internationally. I know you can't speak on behalf of the federation, but Sanjay, to everything he said, it sounds like there's a lot of self-interest that has stopped the development of the sport, and this seems to be FIBA's main concern. Is that the way you see it?
Morning. Not really. I mean, I think what is clear is that the sport is in the middle of a forest fire, and you have to trace it back to the ignition point of this forest fire and who caused this fire. And in the words of Billy Joel, we didn't start the fire. Right? I think if you do the forensics on this, what you'll see is that the crime scene is that it's the BBF that's stood there holding the box of matches. Let me give you a metaphor to explain why the clubs have responded in the way in which they have in launching litigation, right? So imagine you've bought a plot of land and over 40 years you've built a house with a nice garden. It's not perfect, right? It needs a bit of modernising. It's not the biggest house on the street. In fact, everyone's looking jealously at the Premier League's big house down the road. But it's your house, you built it, your resources, your blood, your sweat, your tears, your money. There are rumours that a developer is going to come to town and is interested in developing your area. To choose a random name, let's call that developer the NBA in 4 or 5 years' time. So, spotting the dollar signs, a local tin pot council decides to illegally seize your house, doesn't compensate you for it, and purports to sell it to a new owner for a price that doesn't reflect its current market value. The council then tells you it's okay, the new owner can't move in for a few years, so you can rent the spare bedroom out until the new owner moves in. How would you react? Because that's the reality of the situation that the Super League finds itself in. The way that we see the situation is that, look, we want to be playing. We want to be. If we weren't playing, there would be no top tier basketball in this country, not just in the men's game, but in the women's game, because they're intrinsically linked. We want to be recognised as a league. We want to play under the jurisdiction of FIBA. We've been asking repeatedly for that since February, and we've been refused. It's one of the things we're arguing over in the litigation. Super League is not separate from the national team system. It's the foundation that makes it possible. We provide the players, we provide the coaches, we provide the facilities, we provide the ecosystem. What this situation actually casts a spotlight on is the issues facing British basketball, which is the governance structure doesn't act as an enabler, it acts as a barrier. And so what we say is that part of the solution is that we need a governance review, because we're in this situation due to the failings of the federation, right? The Super League clubs operate from the grassroots to the elite. We're led and owned by commercially experienced professionals, and we need a governance structure that reflects that reality. It's not unusual in sport, but what we've seen crystallise here is the challenge where you have part-time volunteers leading full-time professionals. And it's worse than that, because over the last 18 months, what we've actually seen is the Federation has actively sought to harm the Super League and its clubs. They created an illegal tender process to create a replacement league. These are the what we say in the litigation. They've entered into an illegal license with the GBBL. They've illegally rejected our requests to play under FIBA and BBF's jurisdiction. They've been lobbying the Home Office to try to prevent our clubs from obtaining visas for elite overseas players. They've been blocking UK teams from competing in elite European competitions this season. And they've essentially put themselves in an intractable conflict of interest position where their commercial interests conflict with their duty of sport. This is the reason we're where we are now, not the 40 years. This is the reason we're where we are now.
Let me read the BBF statement, and then we can bring Chris in. So the BBF sent a statement for the show. The BBF's vision to see basketball in Britain Sorry, let me do it again. The BBF's vision is to see basketball in Britain fulfil its potential, and it requires a long-term plan that continues to centre on players, coaches, officials, clubs and the basketball community. The ambition is for a sustainable future that has financial and operational stability, high-profile competitive opportunities and consequential commercial value and social impact for all involved in the sport in Britain. Our goal is to ensure we continue to work with FIBA to find the right interim solution that will support the delivery of long-term success of our sport. We made it clear, Chris, you can't speak on behalf of the BBF anymore because you stepped down earlier this month. But I did notice you wince at several things that Sanjay said. Governance can be a very dry subject for a podcast, but it is relevant in this discussion, and you did wince.
Oh yeah, I winced. Partly because I think what's not helpful, even if I were still chair of the federation, as Sanjay rightly said, there's litigation going on, and Sanjay's a lawyer, I'm not, but so he'll know better than me that courts don't like you to litigate in studios. So there are lots of things I could say in response to some of the specific points that Sanjay's made. I think if we're looking at the background to this, yeah, there is a backstory. It is a 40-year backstory, but why are we having this conversation now? Well, we shouldn't have been, because the previous version of the league, which was owned by these same clubs, their license was meant to run till 2027. It was a 10-year license. It was signed in 2017.
This is the British Basketball League that collapsed,
yeah,
yes?
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. And it was owned effectively by the same clubs. One of them has since gone out of business, Plymouth. So there were 10 at that point who owned it. Went down to 9. They sold half of their league effectively to a group called 777, who became famous in the last 18 months because they were trying to buy Everton Football Club. Mm-hmm. Now, 777, I think I can say here, if you Google them, you look at their Australian Airlines, which had to, couldn't take their planes off. You look at the Standard Liège fans, one of the 6 or 7 football clubs they own, who are blockading their own team's bus in protest at the owners. And the deal which these clubs did with 777 basically fell apart last summer because the promised finances weren't there and other things. So at that point, you didn't have a league. Those same clubs worked very quickly, and the federation worked quickly with them to try and retrieve the situation. Super League Basketball has now existed for 15 months as a company. I think 5 of the 9 clubs changed ownership last summer, and the new owners who came in, I think, probably did see the NBA arrival. Most of them came from the States. They all came in after the federation had said, as things fell apart, that there would be an open process to see who might operate the league. And the assumption, the hope, the conversation through last summer was that SLB would bid as the incumbents. They didn't. The process was run very carefully and with very good advice. So to say it's illegal or unlawful is a matter of Sanjay's opinion. I would disagree with that, having been kind of around it. It's a long story.
To just kind of tap into Sanjay's metaphor at the beginning, he put it in housing terms, right? And listening to that and listening to what John said, it feels like the people involved are waiting for a big payday that they hope will come further down the line. And in doing so, may well be stopping the development of a sport in this country in the process. How likely is that big payday? How fair is it that they should have some compensation for their investment into the sport? And who decides what that is?
Well, basketball's a huge global powerhouse as a sport. FIBA has more members, I think, than FIFA. So there are more countries registered with the International Federation for Basketball than football, and it's on public record now that the NBA is coming. So there's going to be an NBA Europe League in conjunction with FIBA, the International Federation of Basketball. There will almost certainly be 2 teams playing in that league from Britain. It's really, really important that in that context that those two teams are also able to compete in a domestic league, so it doesn't feel like two great. You can own your house in the forest.
So it's effectively like a Champions League in footballing terms.
Kind of, yeah. And the exact format is still not revealed. But I mean, to take Sanjay's metaphor, it's like you can live in your house in the forest. You can think that there's a fire going on, but you've got these two great blooming flying saucers going to land from outer space, which are a completely different level. And either you're going to get kind of crushed or completely overshadowed by them, or you'll be part of a national championship structure which actually connects to them, which means that ambitious clubs can look one day at playing in that league, and certainly they will all of the clubs will experience the benefits of having those kind of powerhouses in their country. So I think that you're right. There is, but I could also go back. I mean, 40 years. In 1982, I was a student in Manchester, and we rented a television in our house. In those days, you rented televisions, and it was a big kind of investment, a colour TV, because Channel 4 launched, and in their launch kind of schedule, they had live British basketball on a Monday night, and it was amazing. And it was a kind of new dawn for British basketball. Unfortunately, it was a false dawn. And, there is a 40-year story of promise and disappointment. And as I said, it was not actually the intention, and it was not the plan, and nobody wanted British basketball to be in a situation right now when it was looking at the men's professional league. And I'll just correct something you said, Gabby. FIBA have actually frozen the men's senior 5v5 programs, and the federation's capacity to license men's professional leagues. The women's program, I'm really happy to say, goes on. The youth programs, the amazing 3x3, the new form of the game.
So all of those teams can still play internationally.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the first time in a decade, in more than a decade, there's public funding going into the 3x3 program, which is a really exciting form of the game. It's a form of the game where Britain can rise through the global ranks much more quickly. The Olympic champions, men are Dutch, the Netherlands, the women are Germany. Britain has a blueprint to be that good. And we're going to be really good at 5v5 too. So all of that is going on, but it's a real pity that this dispute is happening. And if I may just say something else in terms of what Sanjay said, one of the, as I said, the intention and the assumption and the belief, and actually what had been said, was that SLB were going to bid. And certainly I, speaking personally, really wish that they had. They chose not to bid and put out a statement in January saying that they wanted to operate, quote, outside the purview of the federation. But the people who did bid were subject to very, very rigorous scrutiny and came in with a package for the clubs, which bizarrely, to my mind, when that incoming operator wrote to the club saying, we'd like to talk with you about our vision, about the future of the game, about how we want to run it, about where the benefits are, the clubs actually refused even to talk with them, even to hear what was in that offer. So, someone moves into your neighbourhood, you're living in a house, you have a sense of ownership and entitlement because you've lived there for ages and you think it's your wood. Someone comes in, maybe they're actually going to create a more stimulating and more propitious environment for you to succeed. The clubs refused even to hear what was on offer for their own reasons, but I think that's a really great pity.
Sanjay, why didn't you bid then? And what is there something about your product, Super League, that doesn't want to work with the federation?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. So, and look, I've come in the last 3 months to try to help to find some kinds of resolution to this. So I'm also picking up some of the history, and my understanding is not aligned with Chris's understanding of the history of the way in which the tender process was initiated, and the timing of that, and the timings of the investments from the new investors in the league. And it's not so much not particularly wanting to talk to the new. If you take my metaphor, you're asking us to talk to the new owner of our house. So you've kind of seized that house and tried to pass it on to someone else and saying, actually go and talk to them. You've assumed that we would want to be in that league. You haven't worked with us and carried the clubs along with us. My understanding is at the time there were concerns about the way in which that process was being handled. And for instance, things like the price for owning the license to the league was way, way, way out of kilter with anything anywhere in the market globally. And our understanding is actually there wasn't the right level of due diligence done on the new partners. It's a question that we think ought to be raised as part of the governance review. We understand that, for instance, we've heard stories and examples of the board not actually all members of the board even reading the license that was granted and only parts of it being read out to them. These are basic governance failures for a national federation to be doing this kind of stuff. So really, it's our position is this was unlawful from the start. So why would we engage directly with someone that's seeking to benefit from a process that's unlawful and a license that we say is unlawful?
Can I just jump in quickly, because this is really important. So, I mean, once again, the history of British basketball's underachievement relative to its potential is not a happy history. And I think the national governing bodies, and certainly the British Federation, which has only existed since the run-up to 2012, has to take its responsibility in that. And that's one of the reasons, for example, why basketball had fallen out of the public funding programme and so on. But the level of scrutiny that was involved in British Basketball Federation actually becoming compliant with the governance code in order to receive public funding was very high level of scrutiny. And you know, the notion, one of the ironies, there are many kind of catch-22s and vicious circles in as I look back from my perspective now, having stepped out. But around the time that the clubs started using words like unlawful to describe the tender process, what the Federation did was to offer the government, DCMS, UK Sport, a complete open book on the process, including the minutes of board meetings, several board meetings, many board meetings where this had been discussed, and the tender documentation and so on. There was an independent majority panel that actually assessed the bid and so on. So the offer was from the Federation, please come and look at what we've done, and if there were mistakes or things we might have done different, then we would have wanted to know. That was me saying we from the point of view of having been the chair of the Federation. So that's one thing. The other thing is about the amount of money. I mean, the amount of money for the new license. Sanjay is saying it's not comparable. I mean, there was an auction in April. I think Sotheby's auctioned one of Kobe Bryant's jerseys from his early days in the NBA. And it fetched $7 million. And that is significantly more than anyone has ever invested properly in the British Basketball League. There have been promises to invest that kind of money. And part of the point of going to an open tender, there were two things. One is the previous version had fallen apart, and you had the same people wanting to run a new version of the league. So that's one thing. The Federation wanted those people to apply and to learn the lessons, but they didn't apply. But the other thing was to test the market. You know, basketball is massively underdeveloped in this country. I can say it now from my position as an ex-chair. There's been a poverty of vision, a poverty of ambition. And actually, I think, speaking personally, that the numbers that are in the new license are actually pretty low. But the test ultimately was, were there going to be credible funders? And there was strong due diligence done about where the money was coming from, and was it real money, and legally binding commitments to put the money on the table, not to fund this through debt, which is the kind of mechanism that people like 777 use. All of that was done. But the main point was they chose to pay that money. They saw the value of a strong British men's professional league. So that in a way you could say it was testing the market. But I go back to it. It wasn't meant to happen last summer. It wouldn't have happened if 9 clubs, and remember, there are no current men's professional clubs in Leeds, in Liverpool, in Cardiff, in Edinburgh, in Birmingham. So you're talking about the 9 clubs which have.
Well-
there are fewer clubs right now than there were at the time when that 2017 license was signed. There were 12 then. There are 9 now. So, you cannot say, if your house in the forest is sitting in a little kind of crescent of other houses, what you're actually looking at is 4 or 5 of those houses are boarded up and burnt out, because your local community association hasn't done a great job of looking after the kind of collective space. And one of the great things about basketball, genuinely, it's easy to get dewy-eyed about these things, but we're sitting here talking about this. Basketball in Britain is thriving. Basketball is the second most played team sport in the country. The work that is going on, including in some of the clubs in SLB, but many other clubs too, around, which have social impact. The entrepreneurialism of young people kind of straddling the arts, music, fashion, basketball, kind of embracing this new form, street basketball 3x3. This is all hugely vibrant and brilliant and successful. And this whole notion of basketball with a British accent, which doesn't have to kind of be a faint replica of what happens in the NBA. It is actually happening, but you've got here a small group of clubs who think that what's going on is not in their interests, who've dug their heels in, who are taking action. And I have to respect, I don't know, Sanjay wasn't around at the time, I wasn't close to their internal conversations, so they have to think that they're doing this for the good of British basketball. In terms of my experience of British basketball, the players, the coaches, the fans around the whole of Britain, it wasn't working. So this is an opportunity.
Then hang on. It's vibrant. It's grassroots. It's popular. No, I know, and it's fashion, it's music, and it's young people. And John Amaechi has just said, think of the number of people that have been talent that has been wasted over 40 years. The fact that it's still John Amaechi that is coming on a podcast, and that there haven't been not just another 10 John Amaechi, but in his words, tens of John Amaechis that come through, right? So in 2025, I am a young boy or girl in the thick of grassroots basketball, and I am listening to you two, and I'm thinking, what the bloody hell are you doing?
Well,
sort it out for me and my future, and get on with it.
I completely
Because at
agree.
the moment, you are a leisure centre sport, with all due respect, when it comes to media coverage and TV coverage, and you talk about NBA and you talk about this, you talk about that. Look at netball.
Yeah.
Look at netball and the rise of netball and what they have done. And talk to them and learn from it.
You're completely right. Something once again I need to say by way of understanding. So the British Basketball Federation was set up in the run-up to 2012 London Olympics. And it was before that it was England, Scotland, Wales. Basketball's an all-Ireland sport like rugby. So it's just England, Scotland, Wales had their own registration with FIBA. So FIBA said to Great Britain, if you want to play in your own games, you have to play as Great Britain, but you can't go back. So you have to keep the FIBA member being Great Britain. So England, Scotland, Wales look after the grassroots and the kind of the middle of the sport, and British Basketball Federation looks after the elite. I thought when I came into the role of chair 3 years ago that the big problem, because it had been a tug of war ever since 2012, was the relationship between the home countries and the Britain bit, which meant that, for example, there wasn't a joined up way of identifying talent and knowing what was good. There wasn't a joined up tracking of young professional or potentially professional players. All that stuff wasn't going on. All of that stuff has been fixed. There are about 100 young British players playing at the top level of US colleges right now. One of the huge challenges, and I'm not saying that the SLB clubs don't want to help or address this or be part of the problem, is that most of those players won't come and play in Britain because it is a leisure centre sport at the moment, because the standards around strength and conditioning, around nutrition, around how much they get paid, the economics of the sport aren't sufficient for to bring them back. So most of our men played in the European Championships this summer. Only 2 of the 12, I think, were actually playing in British clubs. They're all playing overseas. So chappers, I see and I felt that you can feel the frustration. All of those generations of young people, huge. We've never had a problem with talent. Never had a problem with talent. The problem is with the structures. So things in the new licence, which I wish SLB had bid for, including things like a joined up academy system. So already there is, the home countries are pulled together with GB, funded by UK Sport and Sport England and Wales and Scotland, to get a proper academy system. I worked a lot in professional football around the academies and around coaching in professional football. And one of the brilliant things that's happened, wasn't always the case in English professional football, is that the professional game is absolutely joined up with the Football Association. The new licence that's coming in, the new operators have agreed within that licence to co-fund an academy system.
I feel we need to sort of finish with a word from Sanjay, and you are both the masters of very long and detailed answers, and it is very, very, as you pointed out, Mark, governance can be very, very dry, and but at the heart of this are people. At the heart of this are fans. The heart of this is the potential growth of a sport that could capture the imagination of so many, as John put it, kids, to give them a different opportunity in life. How are you going to change that, Sanjay? How are you going to move on from this and get to a place where the sport doesn't just thrive behind kind of closed doors to niche areas? It becomes something that we have another John Amaechi sat in that chair in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, look, one of the advantages of coming from outside the sport is that you get to see it with fresh eyes, and you get to be the idiot savant and ask the stupid questions, right? And sort of one of the things that I have seen is this recognition, and I've had this conversation with Chris before, that there is this feeling that over 40 years the sport has underperformed and that there is more potential there and it should be doing more to realise its potential. I think the challenge is that the solution that had been put forward was attempting to railroad the clubs, and you need to take people with you. You need to take, including the clubs, and the clubs are really central to this. So, I hope as we go forward, we can find some solution that works. And look, I hear all the great things that Chris is talking about the game, and I haven't heard what John said and about the potential for the game, but all of those wonderful things remind me a little bit about someone else, right? Who I'm sure would love to be remembered as the first ever female Lord Chancellor in 1,000 years of the judiciary. Someone who helped to secure the release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, and who helped to create sanctions on Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. But that's not how Liz Truss is going to be remembered, right? Sadly, she's going to be remembered because of the mini budgets and the market's reaction to it. And still saying that the market doesn't understand her genius isn't going to change history's recollection. And I'm sad to say that the history of the last few years of the BBF is probably not going to be remembered for all those wonderful things. It's going to be remembered for where we are now. Where are we now? The BBF has been suspended. The national team has been suspended, and the BBF is on the brink of insolvency. How does any of that help us? What we need is, I'm sure and I hope that we will get to a situation where the national team is not suspended, where the national team can play. And as we have done, we will play our part as the clubs, as we have done as part of the ecosystem, providing the players and the coaches and the infrastructure. But the BBF is not fit for purpose. There's
something I need to say very quickly, which I think goes to the spirit, Chappers and Gabby, of what you're saying. So there's a generational thing here as well, and I'm 63 years old. My generation needs to move to one side, and there's someone else who could be sitting here. The captain of our GB women is a 2012 Olympian, Temi Fagbenle, played the season before last in Indiana with Caitlin Clark. She's just become part of the first group in an expansion team in the WNBA to get through to the playoffs. Temi's an extraordinary person. She's the captain of our GB team still. She'll go out of her way to come back and represent GB. She will be playing in Manchester in a couple of weeks' time in the first of the European. She should be a household name. She should, and she wanted to play in Britain. She was playing in Britain for the London Lions, one of these teams who, at the point where they were about to win the first European trophy, they cut that women's programme last season. They were also owned by 777. I think that maybe part of the solution to this is that there's a generation that needs to move aside and let those smart, entrepreneurial people who love the game, who have been successful, let them be the stewards of those 100 young people in the States right now playing at high level. And then we'll do what Germany have done and become world champions in 12 or 15 years.
Feels like a positive way to end the chat. Not maybe on an answer that included, I never thought I'd hear this on the Sports Agent's Liz Truss. So
that was exactly my thought as well, actually. There we go. Brilliant.
Sanjay, thank you so much for joining us. Chris,
Thanks,
also.
Gabby. Thanks, chappers.
And yeah,
Thank you both.
This is anything but a kind of simple solution, but I think you've both made your points.
The Sports Agents
with Gabby Logan and Mark Chapman.